world of pro wrestling has tried end of the year shows before. They were in fashion for a time a couple decades ago, and then they kind of fell off. But in recent years, you see companies like WWE and now AEW performing end of the year or beginning of the year shows. For WWE, it's the day one show that apparently will now be moved to Raw. But for AEW, they added to their increasing roster of annual pay-per-views with the final one of 2023 Worlds End. And you would think at the end of the year, after getting through all of the craziness over the last 2 years behind the scenes and some of the dissatisfaction of fans in front of the camera, that AEW could probably end 2023 with a solid pay-per-view, something that they are known for. In fact, it is the biggest thing that they are praised for, is the fact that whatever you think about the storylines, whatever you think about this, that, and the third about the company, their pay-per-views tend to be excellent. Would that be the case for Worlds End 2023? Well, we come into the show with a couple of narratives going on. The Continental Classic has wrapped up. As far as the main league play, you have a bunch of guys who were in that didn't establish any kind of rivalries outside of the tournament, so they were put together in an 8-man tag match for many of the guys who did not advance to the finals. The only exceptions to that would be guys like Andrade El Idolo, who is reportedly on his way out of the company. He's going to be working at Match with Miro in a storyline involving Miro's wife, CJ, who is Andrade's manager, and Miro not being too happy about it. Another participant in the Continental Classic, Swerve Strickland, would be set to renew his rivalry, one that fans have been asking when the conclusion's been going to be coming for a long time, in Keith Lee. And we have a main event level match between Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston, the two finalists of both of the leagues in the Continental Classic, who will be battling for the prize of the Triple Crown, the first ever Triple Crown champion in All Elite Wrestling. We also had a storyline that has been going on for a long time involving the Devil, who has been trying to harass AEW World Champion MJF for a number of weeks. MJF also agreed to have a match and defend his championship against Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe agreed to protect Maxwell Jacob Friedman. Hasn't done a great job of it, but this all leads into their final clash in 2023, a rematch from the Grand Slam show where MJF barely retained his championship against Samoa Joe. MJF coming into the match with a lot of injuries, legitimate injuries, and a lot of questions hanging over his head. Why is Wardlow still coming after him? Why is Samoa Joe in league now with the Devil, as we found out the prior week on AEW Dynamite? And of course, who is the Devil? And perhaps the most anticipated match of the night, which was the long-standing rivalry between Christian Cage and Adam Copeland, carrying over from their days in WWE as the tag team known as Edge and Christian. They would battle in a rematch from a match earlier this year where Christian did get the win, and there was a turn of Nick Wayne's mother on Adam Copeland. Copeland coming for revenge in this no DQ, no holds barred match for the TNT Championship, a prize that Christian Cage holds very dear. With all of this set up, World's End seemed to be a good card, but not the best card that AEW has set for this year. But again, the anticipation and the expectation for an AEW pay-per-view is pretty high. They have set the bar pretty high. So were they able to reach that mark, or did they fall short of it? Well, my friends out here in the wrestling world, I have to tell you that this pay-per-view is a term that MJF has made popular in the wrestling world, kind of mid. The opening match featured participants from the Continental Classic that did not make it to the finals, and once again, another thing that they seem to borrow from New Japan Pro Wrestling, including the tournament itself, and it was a highly entertaining match. Brody King harassing Daddy Magic Matt Menard outside the ring while Jay White laughed at the whole thing was just one part of the colorful combination of characters that was in this match, which was truly enjoyable. Daniel Garcia, who struggled through the tournament but definitely impressed a lot of people, managed to pick up the win in the match. And Jay Lethal, who didn't win anything in the tournament, couldn't even win in this match either. You kind of suspect that perhaps in the future, Lethal is going to have some sort of character change, as they did show him being admonished or encouraged by Sanjay Dutt at the end of the show. Jay Lethal has definitely taken the brunt of the pinfalls in this Continental Classic. Meanwhile, other participants in the match like Bryan Danielson and Claudio Castagnoli, this was kind of a day at the office for them. This match was really focused on helping out Daniel Garcia and also highlighting something that I've been waiting to see for a long time that we only got to see a couple of minutes of, which is Jay White stepping into the ring with Bryan Danielson. Well, it looks like a good start off to the show, and you might say, hey, this is going to be another one of these banger AEW pay-per-views. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for the next 2 hours. And even though we had some good matches, nothing really screamed out as being exceptional. And it should be noted that this show took place in Long Island, New York, which is the hometown of AEW World Champion at the time, MJF. It was at the Nassau Coliseum, I believe, which is a legendary wrestling venue. They did sell out the event, which is the first pay-per-view sellout that they've had in a couple of months. And this is part of the trend of AEW, that despite all the craziness going on with the company, they actually have increased their ratings slightly and increased their attendance slightly, not only for this pay-per-view, but for recent episodes of AEW Collision and AEW Dynamite. Now, you wouldn't know this by listening to wrestling social media that has been in hyperdrive predicting the demise of the company coming up soon. And at the same time that's going on, there has been this quiet and slow trickle up in attendance and viewership for All Elite Wrestling. So you think they could capitalize on this, but this show probably didn't do any favors for getting people to want to come back and watch another show, unfortunately, unless you count what happens at the end. Again, the middle part of this show, Julia Hart versus Abaddon, was an interesting match, getting a new chant that I've never heard before of "This is spooky," because you had two goth characters going at each other, which the AEW women's division seems to be rife with very gothic-leaning characters. Julia Hart, however, is a big standout. I think this match would have been better if we had had more time with Abaddon, who does go by the pronouns they, them, even though they are competing for a women's championship. If Abaddon wants to be called they, them, I'll just call them they, them, but they are competing for the women's world championship, for a women's championship here, the TBS title. Speaking of the women, we also had the AEW Women's Champion, Timeless Toni Storm, who, by the way, I did forget to mention in my year-end video as both a most improved wrestler and a potential for female wrestler of the year, and I do apologize for that. But Toni Storm is one of the brightest spots in All Elite Wrestling in 2023. She defended her championship against the first ever AEW Women's Champion, Riho. And no one expected Riho to win this match. The match was okay, but again, much like most of the middle part of this show, or I would say the middle 2/3 of this show, it didn't really set anything on fire. Toni Storm managing to retain her championship. The match with Miro and Andrade El Idolo was a good match. This was a good match between some of the best wrestlers in the world. Again, the match, however, was a bit overshadowed because people pretty much knew, for the most part, that Andrade is leaving AEW, and in fact, even Triple H on Twitter kind of hinted that a former champion would be coming back to WWE on day one, and everybody pretty much assumes it's El Idolo, and that was confirmed in the post-media scrum by Tony Khan. Regardless, the match worked out the way it should have, and it was a good send-off for Andrade, who, unfortunately, for the majority of his 3 years in AEW, didn't do much until the last 3 months, but if that's any indication of what he's going to be doing in the future in WWE, the WWE fans are getting a great talent. I don't think it's a big loss or big gain for either company, but it is just something to note that it added to kind of the sour tone of this overall pay-per-view. And also adding to the sour tone of this overall pay-per-view is the unfortunate fact, despite it being one of the longest ongoing in the background, on the back burner storylines in AEW, the rivalry between Swerve, Strickland, and Keith Lee that kind of dropped off and has been picked up because Lee's been injured a lot. We were supposed to get the blow-off match on this pay-per-view, and once again, we did not get it because Keith Lee was not cleared to wrestle that day because of swelling he has from an injury that he apparently sustained at the Grand Slam show. Swerve Strickland instead took on Dustin Rhodes, who stepped in. The match was a little bit too long, but it got over the point that Swerve is a killer and probably going to be AEW World Champion within the next 12 months. And Dustin is probably one of the most reliable senior members of the AEW roster and somebody they definitely should keep around. But even despite these two kind of dark clouds over the show in some way or shape or form, the biggest dark cloud over the show was the 8-man tag match that featured the AEW World Tag Team Champions, Big Bill and Ricky Starks, who at the last minute were cobbled together with the Don Callis team of Will Hobbs and Kyle Fletcher, or Konosuke Takeshita, but then it was Fletcher again, then it turned out not to be Fletcher, and it was Takeshita. So Takeshita wound up being in the match, and they were taking on Sting in his last appearance in New York in a wrestling ring, who teamed with Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, and Chris Jericho. Now, again, I'm not going to get into too deep on this video about the controversy around Chris Jericho. I have my initial thoughts, or lack thereof, about whether or not he did something bad or not, because I don't know. You can check that video out on my channel. Hit the subscribe button and a notification bell if you want to be notified when another video comes out about that, because I will be doing a follow-up video as more information is coming out about it, and to how the wrestling industry is responding to it. Again, my opinion is to have no opinion on it, because I don't know. But that doesn't matter, because the fans definitely knew. Now, at the beginning of the match, Jericho came out, and the majority of the fans were cheering the Judas, and it seemed like another day. There was a small smattering of boos, but by the time the Judas song was done, there was a larger smattering of boos, and throughout this match, the boos kept increasing. Now, what I assume happened, since the story about Jericho and Kylie Ray and Nick Hausman broke that morning, that most of the fans in the attendance did not know, and that's why they were still singing Judas and not all booing him. But like I said, by the time the match was getting, the more the match went on, the louder the booers got, and we also got chants of NDAs, we got chants of Kylie Ray, we got people flat out booing every spot that Jericho did, and we even got a chant of CM Punk, which is, I guess, the conspiracy theory people who think that CM Punk is behind in some clandestine plot against Jericho, which, you know, while other things have happened in wrestling, I still think that theory is far-fetched. And yeah, as you guys know who follow my channel, I'm not particularly the biggest fan of CM Punk these days. But that being said, the match also had Darby Allin coming out, and some people may be reading too much into this, or maybe not. He came out and could audibly be heard calling somebody, "You're a piece of S," as he came to the ring. A lot of people think that was directed towards Jericho. There's a whole other story about that with Darby Allin, but we're not going to get into that. And Ricky Starks, probably the most notable one, flips Jericho off when he tags into the match and refuses, apparently, to work with Jericho, and tagged out of the match and would not work with Jericho for the majority of this match. While I can't say too much about what was brought up in the post-media scrum in this video, I will say that Tony Khan was asked a question in the post-media scrum, and the answer I don't think is going to satisfy a lot of fans given what we saw on the show. Again, I'm going to keep this to what's happened on the show, and based on the reaction to Jericho on the show and the fact that the news seemed to have filtered throughout the arena during the course of the match, which is probably why the boos increased over time, this is not something that they're going to be able to dismiss or sweep underneath the rug. They're going to have to, as far as the show is concerned, going to have to either address it, or they're going to have to remove Chris Jericho from their television. That is, of course, a decision for Tony Khan. I don't envy the guy to be in that position, unless well, we're not going to get into that again. I'll talk about that in a more appropriate video. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is that the middle 2/3 of the show were kind of weak, until we got to the no-holds-barred match for the TNT Championship, with Christian Cage defending that title against his former and legendary tag team partner Adam Copeland in the no-holds-barred match. This did invigorate the crowd. It rejuvenated this entire show, which had felt a little bit flat for most of it. A lot of that had to do with the crowd. By the way, Vlad, who is for those of you old school fans, know that this guy Vlad was in the front row of so many WCW and WWF shows back in the day. We haven't seen him on television for a long time attending shows. The story behind that, which is kind of cool, is that his friend just invited him out for the night, didn't tell them where they were going, and it wound up that they were going to World's End in the front row. Sting acknowledged him in the front row, and so did the announcers, which I thought was kind of cool, because If you want to check out, there's a whole documentary about this guy, the super fan Vlad. If you don't know about him, it's actually pretty cool. And I'm actually kind of happy to see him, because I didn't know what happened to him. I didn't know if he had passed away or not. It's happy to see that he's still alive and kicking, and he's once again at a wrestling show, which is pretty cool. But let's get back to Adam Copeland and Christian Cage. This match was a very WWE style of match from, I would say, the 2000s era. There was some blood. There was some fighting in the crowd. We even got a flaming table that Nick Wayne took a weird bump on his ass, but I think that actually worked better than him actually going through the table. And if you noted, yes, I said a flaming table. This match was kind of a love letter to all of the big spots and moments from Adam Copeland's career, which was mostly in WWE, which is why they seemed like mostly WWE callback spots, because Adam Copeland hasn't wrestled much of anywhere else. Adam Copeland wound up winning the TNT Championship in the shortest and new social media post that I've ever seen in my life, because by the time the post went up, it was already outdated, because after the match, Luchasaurus, or the artist formerly known as Luchasaurus, now known as Killswitch, did a little run-in at the end of the match and clobbered Adam Copeland in the back of the head. Now, earlier in the pre-show of this pay-per-view, Killswitch won a Battle Royal, which gave him a contract to challenge for the TNT Championship, which added some mystery and intrigue to this match. You can see that Copeland and Christian Cage are booking their own rivalry, because this reeks of awesomeness, or reeks, I should say, of 2000s WWE. This basically was a Money in the Bank contract situation. Now, why Killswitch brought the contract with him to the ring, I'm not really sure, but Christian, immediately after Killswitch knocks down Copeland, starts asking Killswitch for the contract. He wants the contract for himself so he can regain his championship. Now, Killswitch protesting, like, I earned this is mine, I did this once again, and Christian whispers something into his ear, and you see kind of Luchasaurus deflate, and he hands the contract over to Christian, who, looking like Dennis the Menace, signed the contract. I think even his tongue was kind of like sticking, like he did that little smirk thing where the tongue sticks out the side of your mouth as he's grinning, signing the contract, hands it to the referee. The match is on immediately, and Christian, just like that, regains the TNT Championship, making Adam Copeland the shortest reigning TNT champion of all time. By the time he woke up and realized what the hell had happened to him, they were already playing Christian Cage's music. So that was probably, without a doubt, it was the match of the night. It was the spot of the night. It was a great, and now, yeah, it's very overbooked. It's very 2000s WWE. But on this show definitely needed this bit of injection of 2000 sports entertainment style of pro wrestling, so I didn't mind it too much. In fact, it's the match of the night for me. I love the whole thing. I love the post-match angle. This worked for me. It's probably not going to work for some people, but it is a match I would recommend you watching on the show. We then will go to the finals of the Continental Classic. Eddie Kingston, Jon Moxley. This, again, another callback to a storyline that's been on the back burner and come back and gone away for a long time in AEW since the pandemic era. Eddie Kingston, can he win over his friend Jon Moxley, who invited him in kayfabe and shoot, brought him in to AEW? In fact, he said that Eddie Kingston wanted to quit AEW at one point in time, and Jon Moxley was the one that convinced him not to back last year when Kingston wasn't doing much in the company. This was another really good match. Now, it's not the best match in the tournament. I think most people will agree on that, but it was a solid match and a good ending to this first inaugural round robin tournament, the way that AEW is doing it. Kingston, this entire tournament turned out to be the storyline of Eddie Kingston and not Bryan Danielson, and I thought that was pretty cool. Kingston gets to live out his dream, and in his hometown, in front of a sold-out crowd, he wins a Triple Crown championship, just like all of his idols in All Japan did years and years ago. He gets to do this. It was another feel-good moment, and then again, I love this for Eddie Kingston, and as a wrestling fan who's been around for a long time, while Eddie Kingston isn't Dusty Rhodes, he's the closest thing this generation really has to a Dusty Rhodes, because I get a lot of that feeling in watching Eddie Kingston, you know, who doesn't have the best body and talks really kind of real to people. and isn't really the best technical wrestler in the world, but he's a tough dude that will fight his butt off, and he wins championships. It makes me feel there are some dusty tendencies to Eddie Kingston, but at the end of the day, Eddie Kingston being now the new AEW Continental Champion and the Triple Crown Champion, along with the New Japan Strong title and the Ring of Honor World Championship, I think he's ascended to another level now, and this is probably the highest point in Eddie Kingston's career so far, and hopefully it's not the last one. Then we get to the main event, MJF defending the AEW World Title against Samoa Joe. Adam Cole, Bebe, is escorting, it comes to the ring to second Max in his corner. And the storyline played out a lot like the last pay-per-view, whereas the last pay-per-view was a leg injury that wasn't legitimate. This time it was the fact that MJF is pretty banged up and his shoulder's pretty messed up. They did incorporate that into the match, which, I sometimes worry about that kind of stuff when somebody's got a legitimate, real serious injury. Same thing with Danielson, and they actually work it into the match and there are people actually pounding on that injury. I'm not a big fan of that, but I also understand it's not my job. I'm not a wrestler, so they can do what they want to do. It's their bodies. But MJF did fight his butt off in this match, but Samoa Joe, it's hard to beat Samoa Joe when you're healthy. It's certainly hard to beat Samoa Joe when you only have one arm. And Max struggled throughout most of this match. Joe had control of it. There was a spot later on that kind of echoed to another spot with MJF from a couple years ago, where he asked Adam Cole for the ring, the Dynamite Diamond ring. And much like Wardlow did, kind of fumbled with it a little bit, but this didn't seem to be intentional. It was enough, however, for Joe to get the coquina clutch and to choke out Max to the shock of the crowd there and win the AEW World Championship. It took like a couple seconds for it to register with me and everybody else, but Joe did defeat MJF and is now, for the first time in 15 years, a world champion of a major league company. Joe leaves the ring and Adam comes in. He tries to console his friend MJF. And then, of course, the Devil's minions come to the ring. And there's 4 guys coming out there in the mask. They go in and attack Max. It seems like they're going to attack Adam too. And that was a little bit of a misdirect. I like the way that they did that. What at first I thought was the head Devil raised a chair and was going to hit MJF. And Adam said, no, hit me. And MJF said, don't you hit him, hit me. And then the lights go off. So at this point, everybody is anticipating that we're going to find a reveal of the Devil, but we don't know how they're going to do it, and they're throwing these misdirects at us, which I like. The reveal was not generic. Everybody was very interested in how the reveal was going to go, and I think for what they did the best that they could with it, which actually turned out to be a really cool reveal. Because when the lights come back up, the chair is not in the hands of a Devil, it's unfolded. And the 4 devils are behind the chair, and sitting in the chair is none other than, as many of us suspected and many of us hoped it would be, was Adam Cole Bay. MJF is apoplectic that the fact that his friend had betrayed him. And not only that, it was clear and obvious here that you had 4 guys, the Kingdom, along with Roderick Strong, and Wardlow, which was kind of a surprise to me because I was expecting Kyle O'Reilly. I was hoping, I should say, for Kyle O'Reilly. He may not be ready to come back yet, but Wardlow was part of this group that I am temporarily calling the Undisputed Devils. And this was kind of all seen coming. They had the Easter eggs for the longest time. Even the guys from the Righteous, if you remember back when the Righteous challenged Cole and MJF for the tag team championships, then they had those little paper cutout people representing MJF and Adam Cole. They wrote on the one for Adam Cole, liar. Hey, Roderick Strong has been saying Adam Cole is his best friend for the longest time. This is all a big setup. Wardlow even tried to give a misdirect and said on social media that he was going to be out of the country. So this all worked out pretty well, and they did exactly what they said they were going to do. They told everybody what was going to happen. They told Max what was going to happen. Was it predictable? Yes. But it's actually, storyline purposes, kind of cool to go back and look at all of the beats where they basically already told you what it was. And we still were kind of suspecting, well, maybe it's Jack Perry, and maybe it's this person, and maybe it's that person. It was always going to be Adam Cole if you look back at all the Easter eggs that they laid out for us over the last couple of months. And they did exactly what they wanted to do. They destroyed MJF. This wasn't so much about getting the world championship. This also, by the way, explains why they attacked Jay White, because remember, Jay White is the one who took out Adam Cole, so it does make sense that the Devil's guys would attack Jay White. Now, how the Acclaimed is going to fall into this, I think we'll see over the course of the next month or so that they're going to probably figure into this some way, shape, or form. But the main crux of this post-match spot was that, yeah, they had made a deal with Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe would get the championship. The Kingdom have the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships. MJF is crushed. He's lost his best friend. Wardlow gets his revenge. And they wipe him out at the end of the show and stand over top of him saying, you knew this was coming. Which is, kind of a meta thing there that they're saying it to Max, but they're also kind of saying it to the crowd, you knew this was coming. And that was the end of AEW Worlds End. Again, a show that overall was mid, especially for the middle 2/3 of the show. But the opening 8-man tag match, I definitely suggest you watching. And the last 3 matches, Kingston and Moxley, the excellent match between Adam Copeland and Christian Cage, and the main event with MJF and Samoa Joe. I thought that those parts were great. The show as a whole, I can't say was great, but if you want to go back and watch this, I would just watch those matches. And you can watch the other matches. They're not terrible matches, but again, there's a lot of messiness that has plagued AEW for the last 2 years that's all wrapped up into the middle part of the show, and that's probably the best way to describe the middle part of this show. But that's my thoughts on it. I want to know what your thoughts are on it. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. And until next time, I will see you guys here for more news and reviews on the Rant and Review Pro Wrestling. Happy New Year, and let's try to hope for a better 2024 for all of us as wrestling fans. Have a good day.